Throughout the last year and a half of war between Israel and the terror group Hamas in Gaza, Israel has consistently faced accusations of genocide. And according to this accusation, one of the weapons that Israel consistently wields is starvation. A cheap, simple, silent way of mass murder. Lie or libel or truth.
Your exclusive starts now.
I'm Richard Kemp, a former British Army commander. I served in Afghanistan, Iraq, Northern Ireland, the Balkans, and numerous other operations.
Richard, welcome. Thank you for speaking with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
If I may be so frank, what makes you an expert on these matters?
Well, for one thing, I've got 30 years of military experience fighting in a number of different theaters of operations like Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places, which are not totally dissimilar to what is going on in Gaza. They're not the same. Gaza is unique, but there are other comparisons, and I've seen quite a lot of it. And also, I've been into Gaza on a number of occasions, and I've seen for myself exactly what the IDF is doing in Gaza. I've visited checkpoint crossing points in which the IDF have enabled aid to get into Gaza. And I've seen some of the infrastructure that's been built inside Gaza by the IDF specifically to enable the delivery of humanitarian aid.
So what you're telling me is that you're an eyewitness, but not just any eyewitness. You're an eyewitness with the expertise and the experience that helps you interpret these things.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably not many people. There's been a number of military people who have, from different armies around the world, who have also seen what I've seen. But there's not many outside of that. And everybody that I've spoken to from a kind of objective point of view, who it doesn't necessarily have a strong bias in either direction, agrees with my perspective on what Israel's been doing in Gaza in relation to delivery of humanitarian aid.
So you are far from the lone voice.
I think anyone who looks at this situation with objectivity, and particularly with some kind of experience of similar circumstances, agrees with what I say. I've not met anybody who doesn't, who's particularly those people from military backgrounds, and I'm not including Israelis in this, or even Jews. I'm talking about ordinary military people who have observed what's going on, who've seen it themselves, who've taken part in this kind of conflict before, and pretty much like me, they're actually quite surprised at what the IDF has achieved in Gaza in terms of getting aid in, which is above and beyond, I think, what most armies have ever done.
Now, let's zoom in on the situation at hand. The United Nations has released numerous reports accusing Israel specifically of starving the Gazan people. Headlines call Gaza the hungriest place on earth, and statistics say that 1 in 5 Gazans face starvation. Richard, what is fact and what's fiction?
I think anything the UN says about Gaza has to be taken with a very large pinch of salt. The UN has its own agenda in Gaza, and UNRWA, obviously a core part of the UN, has been seen to be cooperating with Hamas, and indeed some members of staff of UNRWA who took part in the October the 7th massacre and have been seen to collude with UNRWA continually ever since then. And we've seen how the IDF has exposed terrorist infrastructure within UN buildings and in UN headquarters, etc., inside Gaza. So whatever the UN say, I think we should be very, very careful about it. The reality is the opposite of what the UN say. I don't think there's any other army fighting a war at the same time has delivered humanitarian aid to the civilians among its enemy population. I don't think that's ever happened before, but it's happened with the IDF. And in order to facilitate that, the IDF have not only enabled numerous humanitarian organizations to get in, they've specifically built new entry points to enable aid to get in. Some of these entry points, of course, have been attacked by Hamas. They have built new roads inside Gaza specifically to enable the distribution of humanitarian aid, not military roads, humanitarian roads built by the IDF. So the lies that have been put forward that the IDF or Israel is trying to starve the civilian population in Gaza are exactly that. And the reality is that more calories per person have been delivered into Gaza since this war began than UN recommendations for number of calories per person. And in fact, also, more food has been made available to Gazan civilians than was made available at a comparable period before the conflict began. So I'm afraid when you look at these facts, and when you look at reality, there is absolutely no substance to these horrific allegations against Israel, which are designed, of course, to, as so much of the other propaganda in relation to this war is designed to isolate Israel, to vilify Israel, to condemn Israel, and ultimately to prevent Israel from winning this conflict against Hamas.
Let's simplify this, Richard. Are the people of Gaza starving, regardless of whether Israel is to blame or not?
Well, I've been into Gaza on numerous occasions, as I mentioned, and I've seen a lot of Gazans. I've spoken to a lot of Gazans, and I have seen absolutely no sign of starvation, of emaciation, anything. The only exception to that I've seen, or I haven't personally seen it, is Israeli hostages being released in these bizarre, macabre ceremonies by Hamas. And some of those clearly have been malnourished and underfed, but I haven't seen any Gazans in that state. Now, that's not saying there aren't any, because I haven't seen the whole of Gaza. I haven't seen everyone, obviously, but the ones I've seen appear to be pretty well fed, pretty well nourished. Of course, they're suffering. Obviously, the Gazans are suffering, and I think we all hate that. But I don't think there's any substance really to mass starvation. We've heard so many different reports from different organizations, including the United Nations, about statistics of starvation, and all of them, I think, have ultimately proven to be false.
Now, Richard, on to a more recent accusation, weaponized food distribution. According to this accusation, Israel opens fire on Gazan civilians who gather at humanitarian aid points where they receive food, water, and medication. According to this accusation, over the past month, more than 400 people have died, and over the past 48 hours, 44. What's the reality?
Well, obviously, I don't know everything that's happening inside Gaza. I would be extremely skeptical about that. I think anybody, and the allegations are that the IDF is shooting Gazans who are going to collect aid. Now, why would the IDF, apart from the IDF's general morality, which is on a par at least with every other Western armed forces, what would be in it for the IDF to do that? It makes absolutely no sense. What does make sense is for Hamas to want to do that, because they want their population only to receive aid through their own delivery means, which is a way that they control the civilian population in Gaza. It's a way also for them to raise funds, because they loot aid trucks, they seize aid, they use some of it for their own purposes, and the rest of it they sell to the Gazan civilians at a huge premium. Free aid paid for by our taxes, and they sell it to Gazan civilians to raise money for their terrorist activities, to pay their terrorists, to recruit new terrorists, etc. So without having full possession of the facts, I simply don't believe that the IDF is doing this. I would certainly believe that Hamas is more than capable and motivated to do it. They have the motive, absolutely have the motive. And some of the Gazans that I've spoken to inside Gaza have told me that they've been threatened by Hamas. They've been told they were killed if they collect aid from some of the distribution centers. And they certainly haven't mentioned anything about Israeli violence towards them when getting aid. So I think, the evidence is very far against the allegations that have been made by the UN and others against the IDF.
Now, Richard, you've been to Gaza recently with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Can you give us a glimpse of the reality on the ground?
Yeah, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is a private body it's not part of the Israeli government, it's not US government, it's a private body that's been set up in order to get aid directly to Gazan civilians who need it without it first falling into the hands of Hamas. And they do that. They've established 4 compounds inside Gaza, which are externally protected by the IDF, but at some distance. They secure these compounds themselves, largely with American former military officers and personnel who are armed, and they oversee the distribution of aid. They allow Gazans to come into their different compounds, collect the aid they need, and leave. And the whole purpose of it is to wrest control of aid from Hamas. And I think it's the ones I visited one of them actually, and I think it was exemplary. It was very effective. It worked very well. It enabled people to come and get aid and then leave, and it kept the possibility of Hamas seizing the aid. Now, when they leave, in some cases, that's not to say that they couldn't either sell the aid themselves or they couldn't give it to Hamas. Maybe, we don't know. Everything can't be controlled. But I think it's certainly a huge and hugely significant step forward.
Richard, can you tell us a little bit about the reality on the ground? What are the people saying? What are they feeling?
Yeah, well, this aid center that I visited, it wasn't particularly orderly, but it wasn't overly chaotic either. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation do their best to avoid any form of confrontation with the Gazans that come to collect the aid. And the 2 hours I spent at this location, there was something like 20 trucks full of aid in boxes on the ground, and something like 20,000 Gazans came in to collect aid over that 2-hour period. So you can imagine it was fairly chaotic. It was almost like the kind of scenes you might see if a supermarket opened its doors and said everything inside is free, go and help yourself. That's the sort of scenario you've got. But I think everyone got aid that needed it. I think obviously, maybe some people weren't in there quick enough and it was all gone by the time they got there, but then it was going to open the next day. And I must have spoken to at least 50 Gazans, civilians who were coming to collect aid, either directly with those who could speak some English or through an interpreter. And they were extremely grateful for the aid they got. They were smiling, they were happy. It was the first time in many cases that they'd actually received free aid since the war began, as opposed to aid seized by Hamas and eventually sold to them. Many of them said, I love America, because they associate this particular aid project with the United States. I love Trump was another thing that was being said by several of them. And many of them said to me, we hate Hamas, I hate Hamas, kill Hamas. And when they said that, in many cases, there were cheers from the people around them who could understand what they said and hear what they said. The reality is, I think the ordinary Gazan people are probably sick and tired of Hamas. I asked many of them who was to blame for what happened to them, for the dire situation they're in. And of course, they blame what they call the Jews. Of course, that's inevitable. But they also just as much blamed Hamas, possibly even more blamed Hamas. Some of them said that something needed to be done about their plight inside Gaza, but Hamas did the wrong thing. It did it the wrong way. And most of them clearly hated Hamas. The ones I spoke to, I'm talking about. And most of them said that what they want to do is get the hell out of Gaza. They don't want to be in Gaza. They see no future for themselves in Gaza. They want to leave Gaza as soon as possible.
Richard, in conclusion, if there's someone listening today, watching this, who hasn't made up their minds yet, what would you say to someone like that?
I would say, don't listen to all the propaganda. Do not listen to what the UN is saying. Obviously, it's impossible for very many people to go and see it for themselves with their own eyes, but they need to be very selective, and they need to also analyze the reality here. As I said before, the IDF has absolutely no motivation to kill or wound or threaten Gazans coming to collect aid. quite the opposite. They want the Gazans to get the aid, and they are fully cooperating, the IDF that is, fully cooperating with the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. On the other hand, Hamas have every motivation for harming or killing or threatening, preventing people going to these aid stations and getting their hands on aid that is not controlled by Hamas. And one final interesting thought, I think, Hamas is vehemently opposed to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Also, the UN is vehemently opposed to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. It's as though they're speaking in unison. And that raises a question that you need to think very carefully about. Why is Hamas and the UN on the same side?